I think that's the one baffling part of this case, that to this day we can't understand why he committed this mass murder.
I'm sorry for what I did, but that's hardly enough.
You think of irony, karma, what you sow, so shall you reap.
In some cases, teen killers are deemed pure evil. In other cases, they're portrayed as victims of impossible environments. In Seth Privacky's case, it's hard to find a simple answer. After he unalived his entire family on a Thanksgiving afternoon, detectives struggled to understand why. His confession didn't make a lot of sense, and his family history did not paint a horror picture. Then, a shocking plot twist ensured Seth would never reveal his full motive. What happened that fateful day, and where is he now? This is the full case of Seth Privacky. It was the last Thursday of November 1998, and a large family in Muskegon, Michigan was celebrating Thanksgiving. The mother, Linda, was taking a shower, and the father, Stephen, was out picking up his father, John. Inside the house were two brothers, 19-year-old Jed and 18-year-old Seth. Jed was watching TV in the living room. He was waiting for his girlfriend, April, to arrive, and then they were going to set the table and help his mother with the plating. Seth, however, was upstairs in his bedroom, loading his father's .22 caliber Ruger firearm. Knowing his father had just gone out, Seth headed downstairs and aimed at his brother's head. He fired one round. Then he walked into the garage where he quietly waited for his father and grandfather. When they arrived, he fired 3 bullets, 1 into his father and 2 into his grandfather. He wanted to make sure that his grandpa was gone. After this, Seth went upstairs where he waited for his mother to come out of the shower. When she did, he aimed and fired. She did not have time to realize what was happening or to plead for her life. Seth's whole family was gone within minutes, but someone was yet to arrive at the house. April Boss, his brother's girlfriend. When she rang the doorbell, Seth let her in. She managed to see the bodies and let out a horrified gasp before Seth aimed into her head and fired. If Seth had not taken April's life, he might have been on the run for longer than 13 hours. However, April's family grew worried as their daughter did not come home that evening. Knowing where she had gone, April's parents drove to the Privacky house. The house was quiet, but the door was open. So the two stepped in, only to find a scene more brutal and graphic than anything they have ever imagined. Everyone was dead, and the house had been ransacked. It looked like a robbery gone wrong. Except one person was missing, Jed's brother, Seth. The family was left wondering if Seth had managed to escape the robbery in due time, or if he was responsible for the horrors that had happened that day. April's mother, Julie, phoned 911 with a trembling voice. She said, "There's a man, I fear he's deceased, lying in the driveway. All the expected occupants are nowhere to be seen, but their vehicles remain." By sunrise the following day, this case was called the worst crime in the history of Lake Michigan. By the end of the day, Seth Privacky was in jail. He had confessed to unaliving his entire family and staging a robbery, but his capture provided more questions than answers. The victims of this horrific mass murder were identified as 49-year-old Linda, 50-year-old Stephen, 78-year-old John, 19-year-old Jed Privacky, and 19-year-old April Boss. On the night that the authorities arrived at the Privacky residence, one officer noticed a mysterious figure stalking the house from the wooded area behind it. A quick manhunt ensued, and the officers arrested 18-year-old Stephen Wallace. Stephen was Seth's best friend and confidant. The minute he was handcuffed on suspicion of murder, he told the officers everything. He had not been involved in taking the Privackys' lives, but his friend had asked him to help stage a botched robbery in the aftermath. Stephen had no second thoughts about helping his best friend. Now, he was feeling remorseful and he wanted to help authorities catch Seth. Seth ran away the minute he heard the authorities' cars pull up in his driveway. The following morning, his school, Reeves Puffer High School, went into lockdown. The authorities had notified the school that Seth might be hiding on its premises. Superintendent Gloria Lewis released this statement: "Security is to comfort the families of students and the staff. We don't know where Seth is at this point, whether he has harmed himself. If the police thought we were in serious danger, we would take more serious measures." Indeed, Gloria was more worried about Seth than the rest of her students. She was confident Seth wouldn't do anything to harm his schoolmates, but she wasn't sure Seth would simply turn himself in. She was worried he might take his own life before he got arrested. Did she know something authorities didn't? Seth Privacky was found 13 hours into the manhunt, hiding in a barn a mile away from his home. An 18-year-old college student, Genevieve Simonelli, had just left school and was driving around when she saw a soaked hitchhiker and offered to give him a ride. Genevieve had left school out of grief. She had just learned of the death of her two friends, Jed and April. When she invited the hitchhiker into her car, she thought she was doing an act of kindness. But a few seconds later, she saw his face and recognized him as Jed's brother. Her blood froze. She was helping a mass murderer, the person who had taken her friends' lives. She dropped him off, acting like she didn't recognize him. Then, barely holding it together, she phoned authorities and let them know where she dropped him. Seth was apprehended 24 hours after his attack. When he was arrested, Seth stayed silent. He didn't deny unaliving his family. He knew it was too late. However, he wasn't going to talk without a lawyer, at least not at first. As it goes with cases like this, the question was not how, but why? With Stephen Wallace's confession and Seth's DNA all over the crime scene, what happened was quite clear. But everyone was left in shock and disbelief. From what his friends, loved ones, and colleagues knew, Seth was a well-behaved boy. This did not make sense. However, as the detectives began unraveling the recent history in his family, the full reality of Seth's mental decline became a little more clear. His dad, Stephen, was a 5th grade teacher. He'd been teaching for 25 years, and there wasn't one person at his school who didn't speak highly of him. He was kind, patient, and proactive, always spending his spare time thinking about improvements to education and students' well-being. By the way, this was Reed's Puffer High School, the same school Seth used to attend. His mother, Linda, was a receptionist at a medical office. Jed and April were in college studying to become teachers. John was retired and had a very close relationship with the rest of the family. He lived in the same neighborhood as the other Privackys, and he would visit several times a week. From all accounts, he loved Seth very much, and yet Seth had fired twice into his head. Seth's prosecutor, Tony Tagg, expressed his shock at the whole incident. The house was scattered with bodies. There was blood everywhere. This is the most serious and vicious attack on a household I have ever witnessed. It's difficult to imagine what possesses 18-year-olds to do something like this. Seth wasn't going to stay quiet forever. The detectives pressed him again and again for a motive, and after getting a lawyer, Seth was ready to talk. He said it had all begun with his father. His family was ganging up on him, he said. He couldn't take it anymore. When the detectives looked into Seth's background, they found 2 incidents that earned him a criminal record. In 1997, Seth stole beer from a store he worked at and sold it to minors at his school. He was put on probation for a few months, but as soon as that was done, Seth was arrested for shoplifting. That year, a court ordered him to attend counseling. He also saw psychiatric experts, and he was diagnosed with depression. The court thus ordered him to take the antidepressant Wellbutrin. When he spoke to Detective Dennis Edwards during his interrogation, Edwards remembers he sounded flat, like nobody's home. But who's to say if that was because of the mind-altering meds or because of his psychopathic nature? Reportedly, a family friend of the Privackys said that Stephen Privacky thought his son was a psychopath. Linda had also complained that Seth was out of control, and she claimed that her son drank alcohol at least since the age of 16. At the time of the incident, Seth's academic score had improved drastically, and his family was proud of him. However, Seth told detectives that he was more unhappy than ever in those last few months prior to the incident. He felt isolated and misunderstood. And on the Sunday before the attack, Seth's dad asked him to move out of their house. It would have almost sounded like a tearjerker story were it not for Seth's empty, emotionless tone. With the same voice, he calmly described how he phoned his friend Stephen after taking out his entire family. "It's done," he told Stephen. Stephen knew about Seth's plan from the day before. He simply said, "I'm going to kill my entire family on Thanksgiving." Stephen didn't try to stop him. Considering Stephen's decision to help his friend stage a robbery, one might think he had similarly psychopathic tendencies as his bestie. After unaliving his family, Seth phoned Stephen and they began to work. They moved the bodies around the house, laying John out on the driveway to make it look more like a robbery-type scenario. Then they disposed of the shell casings in a gas station trash can and went to a nearby grocery store to get duct tape. Seth spent several hours mopping up blood, and Stephen went back and forth between he and Seth's place so as not to alarm his parents. Stephen even went to his usual church meeting with his family that day. They had thought of everything, but their plan wasn't perfect. Their moving of the bodies only happened because they realized they were too heavy to be carried and buried in the woods. And the boys were not expecting April's parents to drive into the house that night. When they heard the car, they fled the scene, but Steve was slow enough to get caught. Seth was charged with homicide. There was hardly any need for a trial. There were 2 confessions and plenty of DNA to confirm Seth as the killer. By now, he had been labeled one of the worst teenage killers in US history. Most people were happy to think of him as simply evil. Who else could even consider doing what he did? But when he turned up in the courtroom, his attitude changed drastically. Seth was deeply regretful. Before hearing his sentence, he told the judge,
"I wish I'd never done it. It was all a mistake. I've taken back 1,000 times."
I'm sorry for what I did, but that's hardly enough.
Gloria Lewis was right. Seth intended to take his life that day. Were it not for Jed's college friend to turn him in due time, he would have died that afternoon. Reportedly, Seth felt remorse as soon as his plan was complete, but this didn't mean he didn't have to pay for his crimes. Both Seth and Stephen were charged with 5 counts of open murder. Later on, Stephen Wallace's charges were dropped and replaced with being an accessory after the fact and using a firearm during a felony. In November 1999, he was acquitted by a jury after his defense attorney argued that he only helped Seth out of fear for his own life. The sheriff's department called the verdict a travesty. Stephen's motivation will forever remain a mystery. Was he a bad person or caught at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong kind of friends? Seth Privacky pleaded no contest and was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and 5 counts of felony firearm charges. On May 27, 1999, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before he was transported to prison, he asked the judge to allow him to go on a trip around the world first. As you can imagine, his plea was rejected. What a funny thing to ask for a boy who had just murdered his family. The judge told Seth, "The entire community stands shocked at your actions. You turned what should have been a pleasant Thanksgiving weekend into your own killing field." From prison, Seth continued to make headlines. He was compared to the Columbine shooters and described as an evil, psychopathic killer. Seth did not like these words, so he wrote to the Chronicle, "I was not an outcast in my school. Although I was not the most popular student at the school, I had no lack of friends. I got along with pretty much everybody. Although it is very regrettable that this happened to my family, April Boss included, I am not this monster people make me out to be. I do have feelings, and for whatever it's worth, I am not totally responsible for what happened, because I'm convinced Mr. Kane played a role in this event." You see, in 2007, Seth claimed something he had not said in the 1998 interrogation. When he was 14, Seth began drinking alcohol and smoking pot. 2 years later, he tried LSD and amphetamines. It wasn't long before he became addicted to all, and they turned his life upside down. It explained why his family was upset with him and why they were tightening the leash on him. According to Seth, he had taken LSD on the morning of the Thanksgiving massacre. Suddenly, he decided, influenced by a certain Mr. Kane, he was hallucinating to unalive his family. As soon as that was done, he snapped back to reality. He retched, cried, and decided he would take his own life. Seth's letter made him sound so much less evil than the papers a decade before painted him. However, authorities were skeptical of his claims. Why hadn't he mentioned narcotics during his interrogation? Also, as he was never tested for drugs on that fateful day, no one will ever know the truth. There's another reason we won't know the truth. 3 years after writing that letter, Seth Privacky died, age 30. On July 15, 2010, Seth and 2 fellow inmates tried to break out of prison. The 3 men overpowered a man driving a tractor-trailer at the prison, then crashed the truck through a double chain-link fence. The truck traveled about 100 yards before the men jumped out and began running, but it wasn't long before the guards saw them and ordered them to stop. Seth looked back and decided he wasn't going to stop. A few seconds later, he was dead. The other 2 inmates survived.
Ironically, he died in the same fashion that all 5 of his victims did.
You think of irony, karma, what you sow, so shall you reap.
It was the only way justice could be served in the eyes of many. And in Seth's eyes, it was the only way out. Either he escaped or he left this world. He did not intend to spend any more time behind bars. However, Seth's story remains a mystery till this day, and his death ensures his motive will never be revealed.
I think that's the one baffling part of this case, that to this day we can't understand why he committed this mass murder.
Having a bad relationship with your dad doesn't explain you offing your entire family, and even consuming mind-altering substances doesn't. Several things have to go awfully wrong to get to what Seth did that day. It's heartbreaking to think Seth's family went without a proper goodbye, or a chance to understand why he had made that decision. We can only hope that what's left of his family can move on and live a relatively happy life. Thanks for watching, you guys. What do you think about this case? Do you know other similar stories? Let me know in a comment, and before you leave, make sure you like and subscribe. See you next time.